welcome to Biology, the scientific study of life. More about reproductive rates. Reproductive tables vary greatly depending on the species. Squirrels have a litter of 2 to 6 young ones a year for less than a decade, whereas oak trees drop thousands of acorns each year for tens or hundreds of years. Mussels and other invertebrates may release hundreds of thousands of eggs in a spawning cycle. Why a particular type of reproductive pattern evolves in a particular population is one of the many questions at the interface of population ecology and evolution biology. This is the subject of life history studies. Life history traits are products of natural selection. Natural selection favors traits that improve an organism's chances of survival and reproductive success in every species. There are trade-offs between survival and traits such as frequency of reproduction, the number of offspring produced, the number of seeds produced by plants, and the clutch size for animals. And investment in parental care, the traits that affect an organism's schedule of reproduction and survival from birth through reproduction to death, make up its life history. Life history is initial three basic variables when reproduction begins: the age at first reproduction or age at maturity, how often the organism reproduces, and how many offspring are produced during each reproductive episode. Keep in mind that with the important exception of humans, organisms do not choose consciously when to reproduce or how many offspring to have. Life history traits are evolutionary outcomes reflected in the development, physiology, and behavior of an organism. Life history diversity. Life histories are very diverse. Pacific salmon, for example, hatch in the headwaters of a stream, then migrate to open ocean, where they require 1 to 4 years to mature. The salmon eventually return to freshwater streams to spawn, producing thousands of small eggs in a single productive opportunity, and then they die. This one-shot pattern of Big Bang reproduction, or simul party from the Latin simul once and parito to beget, also occurs in some plants such as the agave, as shown in this figure. Agaves or century plants generally grow in arid climates with space and unpredictable rainfall. Agaves grow for several years, then send up a large flowering stalk, produce seeds, and die. The shallow roots of agaves catch water after rain showers but are dry during droughts. This irregular water supply may prevent seed production or seedling establishment for several years at a time. By growing and storing nutrients until an unusual wet year and then putting all its resources into reproduction, the agave's life history is an adaptation to erratic climate. In contrast to simulparty, it is introparty from the Latin intro, to repeat, or repeated reproduction. For example, some lizards produce a few large eggs during their second year of life, then repeat the reproductive act annually for several years. What factors contribute to the evolution of semiparty versus introparity? In other words, how much does an individual gain in reproductive success through one pattern versus the other? The critical factor is survival rate of the offspring, where the survival rate of offspring is low, as in highly variable or unpredictable environments. Big Bang reproduction, simulparty, is favored. Production of large numbers of offspring in such environments increases the probability that at least some will survive. Repeated reproduction, introparity, will be favored in more dependable environments where competition for resources may be intense. In such environments, A few relatively large provisioned offspring will have a better chance of surviving to reproductive age. Trade-offs and life histories. We might imagine an organism that could produce as many offspring as in Semilbaros species, provision them well like an Enterobaros species, and so repeatedly, but such organisms do not exist. Time, energy, and nutrients that are used for one thing cannot be used for something else. As a consequence, natural selection cannot maximize all these reproduction or reproductive variables. Simultaneously, organisms have finite resources and limited resources mean trade-offs. In the broadest sense, there is a trade-off between reproduction and survival as demonstrated by studies of a number of organisms. For example, um, a study of red deer in Scotland showing that females that produced in one summer suffered higher mortality over the next winter than females that did not reproduce. And a study of European Castra demonstrated that all the survival costs to parents of caring for young. Selective pressures also influence the trade-off between the number and size of offspring. Plants and animals whose young are subject to high mortality traits often produce large numbers of relatively small offspring. Plants that colonize distribute environments of, for example, usually produce many small seeds, only a few of which may reach a suitable habitat. Small size may also increase the chance of seeding establishment by enabling the seeds to be carried long distances to a broader range of habitats, as shown in this figure. Animals that suffer high predation rates, such as quail, sardines, and mice, also tend to produce large numbers of offspring. In other organisms, extra investment on the part of parents greatly increases the offspring's chances of survival. Of walnut and coconut trees, all have large seeds with a large store of energy and nutrients that help the seeding become established, as shown in this figure. In animals, parental investment in offspring does not always end after incubation or gestation. For instance, primates generally bear only one or two offspring at a time. Parental care and an extended period of learning in the first several years of life are very important to offspring fitness in these species.